Steve Bess and Pete Wade and myself. And
Oh wow.
but I'd like to show you some pictures of my heroes. I love that inspired me to try to figure it out. Like this is Tommy Jackson, Jerry Byrd, Z. Clements, and Louis Ennis, and they're the group that moved up to Ohio during the strike, like early 50s, or maybe even the 40s. I'm not sure of the year. And this is like probably 40s. This is Hank Garland, probably my very first hero. And my second one was Del Potter. This is Billy Robinson in the middle of the guys standing. This is Butterball Page, early Ernest Tubb guitar player, you know, do lick, and Joe Price, who played with Jimmy Dickens and a lot of them. Jimmy Dickens hired Paul Howard's band when he retired. Paul Howard and the Arkansas Cotton Pickers. They were a Western swing band, and so I basically grew up liking swing music, or Western swing, and because of these guys, like what I'm talking about, that's what they played. And one of the very first great albums was Hank Garland's album, where he used Joe Morello on drums, and of course this is Grady Martin. And I got a lot of pictures of either Ray Price or Hank Williams. They were the guys I was listening to on the Opry, basically, in the early days of, you know, like either from mostly 40s and early 50s. And they were way ahead of their time. And there was lots of instrumentals, so I always, you know, I thought that it would always be that way. I didn't know it was going to, because even in the early days when I was with Ray Price, it was like, still, they played a lot of instrumentals, and a lot of these bands recorded. Ray Price's band was like the #1 band. I forget what years, but he had a great band. My early teachers were like Jimmy Day, either on steel, or Buddy Emmons on steel. He's not. This is one of the times when Day was with Price, and Day played on most of those records, like Crazy Arms and Heartaches by the Number. And Pete Wade, of course, he more or less took Z. Clements' place doing the Tic Tac. This is Z. Clements, and then I was lucky to get to be at the right place at the right time. That's Johnny Gimbel on the fiddle, and myself, and Red Taylor. And me and Johnny kind of had a run in the 70s. They'd either call him or call me, or we'd work together a lot. And so it was mostly, in those days, being, you know, making friends, and naturally you had to be able to play. Like I say, I was a slow learner, so, but the teachers that I had, like, I mean, not teachers, but like being under the gun of Grady Martin or Chet Atkins, you know, that would be the head guys of the sessions. They'd have suggestions for us, and so I took it from them, and then I would ask a lot of questions, like, I was overplaying. It's real easy to overplay, especially the fiddle. And so I asked Del Potter, I said, how do you know what to do and do just the right thing at the right time? And he said, well, you have to listen to the lyrics. And I never had done that much, because it was, like I said, mostly instrumental stuff is what I wanted to do anyway. So I finally got to where I would tune in and listen to that second verse or whatever I was feeling, and that was the key. What worked for me is to just play just enough. Sometimes you just needed to set the bow on the string at just the right place. A lot of those singers were real particular. For example, Marty Robbins or Conway Twitty. If you happened to step on them, I mean, it was bad. So And it depends on the style. Like in bluegrass, now it's a whole different thing. Bill Monroe liked me to get right up in his ear and play a lot and play busy. But bluegrass is kind of a whole different thing. There was a lot of twin fiddles in those days, and if I was working with Tommy Jackson, he was a great lead player, and but he knew I had the hard part because I was playing a part above him and a part below, and he would say to me, "Does this lay all right for you?" And he'd come up with a little figure, and naturally he made it real simple for me. It was so different in those days compared to what they do now. Well, it's now doesn't even count as far as I mean, it's rock and roll, and it's and in bluegrass it's rock and roll only with acoustic instruments. So all of what I can talk about is the way it was years ago when the stories were good and there was good melodies, and so it once I got over the stage of being nervous and not knowing what to do, it was just a matter of concentrating on that second verse or the chorus, whatever section I was feeling, and it was the ultimate to me. It's what I feel like after being real slow, but finally getting it. I feel like it was the best thing that I ever did. I'm not a performer. I don't play fast, and in other words, I'm kind of the opposite of Mark O'Connor or Aubrey Haney. They're the best and great technique and can play fast and all that. But I loved backing up those singers like Farron Young and Jimmy Dickens and Carl Smith and the early Charlie Pride stuff and Mal Tillis, Ray Price, George Jones. But they sang so good. It's like you didn't have to do too much. There's no such thing as playing too little, but it's real easy to play too much because you have the rhythm going. You have the if it's a 4/4 shuffle, sustain, do a little figure. But those days are all gone. Well, with the exception of an occasional George Strait or maybe Josh Turner or Alan Jackson, maybe. But there's those guys really can't carry Ray Price or George Jones' case. They were real singers. And before the recording got so big, when I used to work spots on the Opry, same type thing. People like Cowboy Copas. I did a lot of spots with Monroe. But Hawkshaw Hawkins, I'm trying to think of some of the early Grand Ole Opry people that I backed up. But anyway, in general, it really is, at least for years, about the song and making them sound good. Working with producer, helping them to help the rest of the band and to help the singer have a hit. That's what it wasn't about. Hey, look how fast I am and listen to this. It wasn't about yourself. It was about everybody other than yourself. And then when you do that, you actually come out smelling like a rose. And so that's again, when you're young, I was just a kid when I was working up in Wheeling, and I worked up there from 53 till 56, and same type of thing. The singers, it was about this. Well, it was also in those days, early days, it was about showmanship too. You had to have. We were kind of early rock and roll, actually. I would run to the microphone and then get back out of the way because it was one microphone. And so I had a lot of great opportunity to learn how to be a showman and play. It was all important. If somebody just stands there and plays, like Chet Atkins did, for example, or sits there and plays, you got to be awful good to pull that off. And of course he was great, so he could pull it off. Or if you're as good as Billy Contreras, you could just stand there or sit there and play. And because you're so outstanding that it works. But with me, it took everything I had. I had to really work at it, and I always, well, I think it's true for singers too. Like you take Anita Carter, could sing a lot better than June Carter, but June Carter had the charisma. And you take like Loretta Lynn, she's got the charisma. Of course, Crystal sings so good, and with the beautiful hair, she gets by with having a great voice. But as a rule, well, just like now, I'd say Loretta is still, more famous than Crystal, and I'd say it's because of the charisma thing. And it doesn't have to necessarily work that way if you're a good enough studio musician like now, but in the early days it was very important. It was very important to understand that, and we were part of the band. Again, the early people I went to see when I was a kid, like Hank Snow, when I seen Chubby Wise backing up Hank Snow, or Webb Pierce, his fiddle player was a guy by the name of Jack Kay. And I always thought, well, they're just as important as the singers, because I didn't realize they didn't make much money back when I was a kid. And but that's kind of, in those days, everybody had comedy in their. They actually put on a show of some kind. And one of the old things was the comedian would come in through the audience, interrupt the show. And my whole role when I was with Crystal was to get up there and do a similar thing like that, and tell a few jokes, and because she didn't. Well, there was me and Lloyd I played the fiddle, and Lloyd played the steel on a lot of her recordings, but she honestly didn't really like country that much. She was more of a folk singer. Loretta liked it, so it all depends on who you're backing up. Like I said, now if you're playing bluegrass, that's especially in the early days, the older bluegrass, it was all right to play too much, and I'd say it was that way in Western Swing too with Bob Wills. I mean, Gimbel. When Gimbel first came to town, he played way too much, but because he was a hot mandolin player that doubled on fiddle, and I was afraid this was going to happen. I thought, boy, if he gets to where he can play that fiddle like he does that mandolin, I'm in trouble. And he sure enough did, and became the instrumentalist of the year several times. And but again, he was a showman too, and that's why when he worked with Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard, they loved him, because he could do a good Bob Wills imitation. Plus, he could play. Very witty guy. And I think it takes that wit, or at least a lot of imagination, even if you got to force it. Like with me, it was more of a force thing as far as till I learned better how to back up a singer by using my imagination. There's a lot of great violinists, and they sound so good. Oh, just beautiful. And they play good as long as it's written out for them. But if you say to one of them, hey, I didn't write nothing out, I just want you to wing it, they're up a creek, because they never got in the habit of using their imagination that much. They never had to, because they wasn't, number one, they want to play classical, and as a rule they don't listen to jazz or country or anything else. They just listen to classical music, the ones that were the best at it. Occasionally nowadays, because of thankful to Mark O'Connor, a lot of them are wanting to play fiddle now, and so I would say at least half or 3/4 of when I teach at one of his camps, it's mostly violinists that are wanting to learn to improvise now. So some of them are getting to be about 1 out of 10 that gets it, because it's two different things. It's like somebody that can type real fast, makes a good secretary, or someone that goes for more than that. I think it's that way in anything in life. And it seems like it takes a long, at least in my case, it takes a long time. Just my 2 cents worth, but I think it's, most of the time, if it's somebody that's real, like a genius, you know, like a Gary Burton or a Lenny Breau or a Hank Garland or Charlie Christian, seems like they peak out early. It seems like they peak out in the first 10 years. But a lot of times what they do during that 10 years is here forever. Like people are still trying to play as good as Charlie Christian, right? And same way with Hank Garland. He had a car wreck, so what happened to him is nothing. Everybody says, oh man, if he hadn't had that wreck, can you imagine what he'd be doing today? No, I don't think so. Again, just my 2 cents. I think he actually peaked out with some of the stuff that he came up with, and it's unfair to mention anybody that's still alive because they might get their feelings hurt. But it seems like geniuses are so good when they're young that they peak out too early. But I think in general, if you play my particular instrument, the time is on your side because. Even when you get older, like I am, you can still write, you can still teach, and kind of know, you know, as far as Ben's, it's, again, there's a time and place. Everybody has their time. I already had my time. As far as studio, you got to be young. You know, the producers are in their 30s, 40s, and the pickers the same way. So once you're, especially with gal singers, once you're 30, it's over. And if you're a picker, once you get 40, the phone slows down because the producers are younger and they're going to call a young Aubrey or Stewart Duncan, and they're young, you know, and they're having their day right now, and I'm happy for them. Andy Lethwich is real good too. And, but in other words, every 10 years, if you'll notice, it changes. Like I took Tommy Jackson, me and Gimbel more or less took Tommy Jackson and Dale Potter's place. And before that, it was Roddy Bristol and Red Taylor, and before that it was going back to Pee Wee King days, it was Shorty Boyd and, of course, Red Stewart himself. And they did some wonderful stuff like in the 30s and early 40s. And again, everything was Western swing, or at least country, you know, with the possum hunters or the crook, you know what I mean, hoedowns, or else swinging. And that's what Paul Howard did. And Jimmy Dickens hired his band. And you heard some of the stuff over the years, those twin guitars. That was Jabal Harrington and Billy Robinson's brother, Floyd Robinson. And they did phenomenal stuff. And again, young, and it's never been, they still, if Jimmy Dickens still sings on the opera, he still has those twin guitars. And so, if you're lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time, like when Irving Rouse wrote Orange Blossom Special, basically a bluegrass tune, it's been done, and it'll never change. There'll never be another tune as good as that. The closest one is the Devil Went Down to Georgia. You got to give Charlie Daniels and his band credit for that, but it's very rare. It's like the Harley Davidson motorcycles. They're still here to stay. How do you beat them? The double-decker buses over in England, the Austin Healey's. Some things never change. You have to accept that. And a lot of it was the right time at the right place. When Roy Acuff came here to be a fiddle player, he was filling in for Arthur Smith, but he couldn't play very good, so he asked him if he could sing, and that began the singing. Before that, it was all based on instrumental music, and those early groups, there was very little singing. There might have been an occasional Mountain Dew or something, but until Pee Wee King hired Eddie Arnold, it was strictly instrumental. And then Eddie Arnold, and then later people like Jim Reeves and Patsy Cline. I mean, they sang so good, and they made so much more money. It became more of a money thing. But Anyway, that's the fast version of what I mean. I don't mean to oversimplify it. It's very complicated. It's mostly about making. I mean, you got to know what to do naturally, but it's mostly getting the opportunity to do that. And where I stayed, Audrey Williams is the one that brought me to town, and I stayed at a place called Mom Up Churches, where it was nothing but musicians. You either stayed at Mom's or you stayed at the YMCA. And when somebody needed a musician, they would usually call Mom's first. And if you were in with Mom Up Church and the other people that was there, like that picture I was showing you of Butterball Page and here's another nice little picture. This is Don Helms, Grady Martin. Grady came here first as a fiddle player, and that's Hank Williams. And that's Billy Bird. That's George Morgan back there in the back. But it was more of about a radio show, you know what I mean? They're gathered around that mic because millions of people are hearing Hank Williams singing Love the Sick Blues or whatever he was singing at the time. And of course, it happened to be on a major label. In those early days, if you were good enough that the Opry hired you to play on WSM, automatically Columbia Records wanted to sign you up. And so it's a whole different world now. But if you were a real great singer like Jim Reeves or Eddie Arnold, they soon left the opera because they make, you know how it is, the weekends is when everybody makes the big money. And so they were above all that. People like John Denver and Dolly Parton, you know what I mean? They're huge universal stars. But again, it goes back to those great songs, those songs that Denver did. I mean, gigantic, you know. And so, and Hank Thompson, even in those early days, they won. Hank used to have a check that he never did cash, sitting in a frame in his house. And he said, "This is why I'm not on the Grand Ole Opry." It was just whatever it was back in those days. The leaders get double, you know, what the musicians. I know when I first came here, spots were $8 for the first spot and $4 for the second spot. So if I just even backed up one artist, I could live off of that, because where I stayed at Mom Up Church, it was $7 a week. And she cooked a couple meals a day. The meals were 80 cents. And so, and we'd sneak into a refrigerator, you know. And in other words, you could get by on $12 a week. But that's in '57 when I came here. But it's a lot different now, like I say. It was mostly then, like my best buddy that got me a lot of work was Shorty Lavender. He's the guy that, very creative fiddle player. He came up with the break on Heart Over Mine. And when Mel Tillis heard it, they were on a fishing trip. When Mel heard him play that, he says, "Oh, I want to write a song around that." But it's just a notey little creative thing that he had. He originally tuned up his fiddle in the Black Mountain tuning to do it. And so Mal wrote Heart Over Mine around Shorty's fiddle break. And anyway, Shorty liked me for whatever reason and would go to bat for me and got me my first jobs, like with Ray Price. And I think I got the job with Kitty Wells and John and Jack on my own. Let me think who else. He got me a job. Oh, I subbed for him with Fair and Young on a tour. He was starting to get into the booking agency. And so, and again, it was because of who you know. He was in with a guy by the name of Hubert Long, who was the big booking agency at that time. And there was always big managers like John Kelly, who managed his wife, Judy Lynn. She had a big Western swing band. I don't think I have a picture of that band handy, but when I was a kid growing up, my brother had a band, and And you know, when you hear a playback, we'd get them to record our little set. Probably it was on an acetate, yeah. And so we would, after we got done with our little radio show up in DuBois, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, we would listen to see how we sounded, and you learn a lot. You know how it is when you hear a playback. It's just worth 1,000 words. I mean, that's something they still talk about when they. Usually your first takes are the best ones. And what I had to learn to do, I used to, when I was doing a lot of sessions, because the bass player, somebody maybe missed it and wants to redo it, and this is usually text nobody sessions. If Marty Robbins sang a perfect song, you had to live with a bad note here or there, and you didn't. But like a lot of the most of the sessions when I was doing that were people that you never heard of. You know, we'd do 3 or 4 a day. And there might be one George Jones session, and the other 3 might be text nobodies. But you do the best you can. And what I learned to do, I would take a little tape recorder for me back in the 70s when I was working a lot, and I would tape my first thoughts, and that way, if they had to redo it, I'd listen to that tape on that second verse or whatever verse I was playing. Usually the first verse is nothing, you know, in those days anyway, with your big artist. Maybe a little piano fills, but usually it started with the main fill starting on the second verse, and then if it was a chorus, somebody filled that. And what I liked about Ray Price was it was mostly always just fiddle and steel. There wasn't no electric fills to speak of till later on. Ray wanted to get more pop sounding, and because Grady was doing pop, you know, gut string stuff with Marty Robbins, and they were kind of competing together. So he had Grady to start playing guitar fills, but for years it was just fiddle and steel, and it was the best of all worlds. And the way Jimmy Day would play, he would kind of sustain underneath me, and it all worked. We didn't. Pete Drake was the same way. He was basically a Jimmy Day imitator, but maybe even a little better tone. But if I'm going on too much, just tell me.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Where, like, when you're on that first take, and it's for some reason, a lot of times turns out to be the best one. Where is that energy coming from?
Well, again, when it's live, there's something in the air. It's something. It's just like you and me were talking right now, right? And it's just something like when you get a bunch of creative guys in the studio. That's why when you listen to your old records, they sound so much better, because it was all done spontaneity, I guess is the word, and you know they're recording it, so you're going for it. But now that they overdub everything, man, they pick it to death, and a lot of times the producers secretly they want to be musicians. I mean, and so they had to do the next best thing, so they became producers. And so they'll start humming your stuff, and then after about 10 takes or whatever, they'll say, "Well, buddy, let's go back. You know that thing you did earlier?" Okay, if I can remember it. But in other words, you got to know all these producers. They're all different, and when you're in, you know, you basically record on all the major labels, and you basically record for everybody, and you don't dare let that go to your head. Naturally, when somebody's on top, like right now, and I won't mention no names, it does go to your head. It probably went to my head a little bit. But you finally realize, hey, I was just lucky I was in. And when you're in, you are really in. And then some of the producers that you like the best, they say to you, "Buddy, what, do you hear the fiddle on this anywhere? Or do you hear that?" They have that much respect for you, you know, in the old days, at least the older producers. And if you don't hear nothing, and you're honest, you know if it's going to fit. And there's been lots of times I say, "I don't really hear anything from me." But it takes a while to get to that, because at first when you're real green, you think the fiddle will work on anything and everything. But once you really know, and when I say once you really know, that's
that's hard to explain. It's very hard to explain. It's like if they got a lot of voice, if it's more of a rhythm thing, and that the feel's just get in the way. If it so again, you not only get to know the producers and what they like, and how to work with them, you also learn if it's either a rhythm tune or if it's something that really should almost be fiddled all the way, which is very seldom, but sometimes there's been, not to brag, but like Crystal's record of I'll Get Over You, it's practically fiddled all the way. And again, most of the time, now we did overdub on her stuff, but Ellen would just go down, and Alan Reynolds, who produced her, he would go down and throw darts or something, and he would say, "Buddy, just let me know when you think you're happy with something, and I'll come and listen at it." And I remember I said, "I'm pretty happy with. There's one place I'd like to fix, though," and he said, "No, that's fine." And so, again, the feels are not that important. If the song is there and the rhythm section is there, it's more about the rhythm than anything. And I'm sure you've experienced this. You can have one guy in the studio that's either dragging or pushing. If it's bluegrass, they're usually pushing, and it ruins it. You can't play good yourself, and you wonder what's the matter with me. I can't play good today. Well, it's one time that was happening to me, and I said that to because this is in the early days. Junior Husky was playing bass, and I said, "Junior, I can't seem to play." He said, "Buddy, it's not you. We haven't found the feel yet." And the feel is everything. One time, I remember when Jack Clements was doing a session, and he just misunderstood what the question was, I think. But somebody said, "Jack, it's doesn't, the feel's not right." And he said, "Well, we'll overdub it." Well, you can't overdub the feel. One time I drove all the way to Knoxville to help a girl do a bluegrass thing, and the rhythm, it was all over the place. And I was there all day trying to make it work. It was just so hard when the rhythm's not right. It's more about the rhythm, after the song. The song's number one. After that, it's about the rhythm. Does it feel good? When it feels good, you can lay out almost, But I know you've experienced that, and that's anyway. Back when you first came in, you said something about what about dream and stuff. Now, I think some of your best thoughts as far as ideas for your instrument, or sometimes even for arrangements, you'll dream about it. If at least that's happened with me. But I remember one time when that didn't work out. I dreamed this. I was hired to be the arranger. It was a thing for Penny. What is his name now? Not Hank Penny. Ray Pennington. And I'd been writing charts, for strings and stuff for him. And so I had this dream about this particular tune. I was one of the ones that I had to write out some stuff. And so I went ahead, and when I woke up, and I wrote down the fills and everything for the strings and even the guitar parts and stuff that I was hearing, and it didn't work. It didn't work. So I don't know if dreams are always necessarily good. But in general, I think myself, anyway, I've always been a dreamer, basically, and always had a goal, first of all, just to make friends with these giant guys, to be accepted by them. I would hear about jam sessions in the early days. They used to jam a lot around here. The great, Grady Martin and Hank Garland, you name it, they would jam all night. And I wanted to get in on that jam session, so I got Jimmy Day to write down a bunch of titles for me that they liked to jam. See, everybody was secretly trying to play jazz, and we knew, hey, you don't dare do that. when it's sure enough a country session. But in other words, you had to be inspired. So you were basically dreaming, and you were hoping someday, in my case, that I would be another Stephen Grappelli or whatever. That's who was famous when I was starting out, and Joe Venuti, and so it took years to realize that on my instrument, it's next to impossible. And again, unless you're a genius like John LaPonte or Billy Contreras, you got to have brains to be a great jazz player. And unfortunately, I don't have any brains. I have a little bit of talent, and I'm persistent. I'll work. When I used to do arrangements, I would spend days on those things. I'll never forget one time I did a thing that I spent a week on for Don Williams, and I was finally happy with it, and I thought it was beautiful. And Don says, "Buddy, it's too much." He says, "I'm country." So the last minute, I just wrote some whole notes. That's all he wanted was some pads. Because the average singers, they don't like... See, I really get into the lyrics, and I really try to make that a whole complete thing. But some people just want the effect of sustains. That's what opened the gate way back for the string machines and stuff, the keyboard synthesizers, and it's still that way to a certain extent. Other than learning how to write a big pad that sounds real full with the whole string section, and once you know how to do that, it's you basically just pad, and it seems like most of the time, that's what the producers and the singers want. Like my early hero, Del Potter, when he would back up Cowboy Copas, I would hear those pretty high thirds he was doing behind Copas, and I thought, what a great combination. His big, deep voice. He sang high, but he had a deep voice. And come to find out, years later, after making friends, after he was gone with his daughter and people, he preferred, I won't mention his name, but in other words, he didn't care for that playing that part. What made me really want to play the fiddle was his great, sounded like an orchestra back there, he would play those double stops just right, nice little fills, and just had a way with ninths and stuff, and making I would see roses. I mean, it was like heavenly sounding. But evidently Copas himself didn't care for it.
It's interesting how you're how the perception can be so vastly different from one good musician to another good musician. I was just thinking as you were talking, Kurt Story played me one time. I guess there's some recording that he's got of I think it was maybe at the time of Red Taylor's passing. Maybe you were visiting with Bill Monroe, and y'all were talking about, you may know what I'm talking about already, where he was mentioning to you, I always wanted you to play it like I wanted to play it, but it was better that you played it like, you know what I'm talking about? He said something to you about that?
Yeah, I do remember that, and I was so proud of him saying that to me, because I remember one time on a session, he said to me, "Buddy," he said, "Kenny cut his hand, and I wanted you to be the fiddle player on this." And he said, "Now, so-and-so," all of his band members, he says, "They were all against you." He said, "I said, no, I want you." And he says, "You're the only one that I've ever had that could do what I wanted." And of course, I don't have that recorded, but something similar, like you say, when I worked with him about a year, and Billy Joe Foster was getting under the weather, and so he wanted me to learn Bill's tunes, and Bill was there, and Billy played him the way Bill liked him, and so Billy was showing them to me, and it was during that I just had my little cassette tape so I could remember what he was, so I could play it back, and sure enough, learn it real good, and it was, and Kurt promised me he was going to I put out a tribute to Bill Monroe thing, and I wanted Kurt to edit that in, but for whatever reason he didn't do it. So, because I was proud of that, because I was like this with Bill, and I loved working with Bill. Now, he wouldn't let Richard Green do fills. He just made Richard just play chops behind him. I don't know why that was, but anyway, I worked a lot with Richard and Kenny, all of his fiddle players. In the early days, he didn't pay real good, and so he'd have a different fiddle player. It seemed like every month or every other month, and I worked with a lot of them. I can't remember. Gene Lowlinger was the name of one of them. One time we did a tune. Bill called it Bluegrass Swing, and so I learned the harmony with Gene, and one night Gene wasn't there, but he wanted me to play that, and I said, Bill, I don't know, I'm not sure of the melody. I said, all I know is my harmony. He said, well, just play that. So he announced the number, and I was talking to David Greer. David Greer happened to have a recording of that particular spot way back in the early 60s. And anyway, it's called Bluegrass Swing. And I remember years later, Bill said, do you remember how that goes? He says, I'd like to record that. But we never did get a chance to record it. But I did work up Road to Columbus with him, but I didn't make the session. Kenny Baker did, and Kenny changed it from what I had originally. But Kenny plays so good. It's probably better the way Kenny did it. But I still remember how Bill wanted to do it, and it was completely different than the way it ended up being. But
yes, that third over the 4 chord, right?
Yeah. See, originally. He wanted me to play the octaves. That was octaves, and then it was a major seventh, a C, even though he went to the 4 chord. Bill heard a lot of stuff like that, but when Kenny cut it, he went da 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 da, and then he went to a seventh, which doesn't make sense because as a rule, if you're going to play a D7, that means you're going to go to G, right? But I mean that was more the Baker style, and that was fine. But it is, sometime I'll show it to you the way Bill originally wrote it.
You had a lot of time to kind of soak in kind of a lot of what, you could probably see how his wheels were turning creatively. It seemed like he worked within kind of a finite system creatively in a lot of ways. Is there any way that you could like characterize like his system and kind of his parameters of like the sandbox he was kind of playing in?
I can just tell you my impression. Like when I remember we played Carnegie Hall, and it was me and Benny Williams playing the fiddles, and he was always teaching us fiddle players fiddle tunes. He loved the fiddle more than the mandolin. And I remember one tune, it was so complicated, I couldn't get it. And at the time, as far as really, and he put it down on that tape we're talking about, and it's called, what is the name of it? Can't think of the name of it. I almost thought of it. But it's probably the best tune on that whole CD, and Kurt Mike can tell you the name of it. Kurt engineered all that. Galley Nipper, yeah, I think that was the name of it, Galley Nipper. And anyway, but all of his life he would play us something that he wanted us to learn, and if he didn't like what we were playing, he'd say no, that's not it. And finally, when we came up with something he liked, he'd say, that's it right there. That's exactly it right there. And so I want this lonesome and old-timey, I don't want no hot licks, is what he would tell us. But if you listen to his playing, it's do-da-da-da. He's jabbing. He's playing jazz stuff, but he never realized he was playing jazz, you know what I mean? and occasionally I think back all kind of little things like it's how come you fiddle players never do this? And he played you know how you play San Antonio Rose double stops, da da da. Well, it was a lick like that, and then he'd say, how come you fiddle players never hit this, you know, F sharp up in third position and a D note? He says, how come you fiddle players never do that? And I knew why I didn't do it, but I didn't want to go into a lengthy thing. See, if it's two fiddles, and I'm playing the double stops, I need to stay with thirds. So I would go on up to that high D and A fourths, rather than, even though the melody is a D note, rather than doing it the easy way, because I don't want to throw the guy that's playing third with me. See, but I didn't want to try to explain that to Bill. But in other words, he knew what he liked when he heard it, but you know, just like he thought that he invented minors. And so you don't want to say, Bill, minors have been around a long time. You didn't, you know what I mean, if he thought that. Sometimes, you know, he'd even pick up his guitar and show us things, and, you know, I'm the first one that ever played a minor. And, it was more or less just country growing up, you know, like Loretta Lynn would say country things and think country ways. You know, her mom liked to read your palm or read the tea leaves and stuff. It's just old-timey Kentucky stuff, and it's wonderful. Really, it's beautiful. That's fine. And it's just the way it was years ago. You know, people were odd a little bit, you know, and so everybody respects Bill so much and loved him. If you ask Kenny Baker who wrote Jerusalem's Ridge, he'll tell you Bill did. If you ask Bobby Hicks, how about this tune? Bill wrote that. They have so much respect for him. So what I was saying, really, I hope I didn't say anything negative. I'm saying he did. He wrote them all. He wrote Road to Columbus. But all I'm saying is we had to do something to get his qualifications. When we finally did something, he'd say, that's it right there. But one time Bobby Osborne said, Bill, you know that tune I heard y'all playing on the opera the other night, Northern White Clouds? He said, oh yeah, he did a fine tune. And so Bobby has a little bit of, I don't know, anyway. Bobby said, well, Bill, play that for me. Oh, Billy Joe. In other words, he wrote them, but he didn't necessarily perform them, you know what I'm saying? So he was all right. He was a giant. I mean, he came up with, but people don't realize this, he was a Bob Wills fan. All those people were. All their repertoire came from swing, because everything was swing back in the 30s and 40s. Other than hoedowns and stuff, square dance. It was swing music, you know. They always, you know, it was Western. Country and Western was the title. You know, if you were String Bean or Grandpa Jones, you know that was country or mountainy, and but if you were Pee Wee King or Paul Howard or Jimmy Dickens or Ray Price, it was Western swing. Well, at least halfway, you know, because Hank Thompson was the big guy in the early 50s, late 40s. The first time I ever heard twin fiddles was on Wild Side of Life. It was the Hayes brothers, Joe and Kenneth Hayes, and then around here, it was Mac Wiseman, Tommy Jackson and Del Potter, twin fiddles, and Hartford was just loved that sound. Was always talking about the Nashville fiddle sound. And for a while, he tried to record that and did a lot of albums with that type of sound. But it was like he used 3 or 4 fiddles, but he would say, well, I'm just trying to capture the way the early guys did it. And
that's a tricky thing. It's like the spirit of the age can't be replicate it or something. That was going to be like part of my next question. It's like you hear somebody play a melody, even a simple melody these days, but it doesn't sound good. A lot of times it's like it's just something about the way the phrasing, or it's just like people don't, since they grew up playing so many licks, they don't know how to make the melody sound good when they play it in a simple way. Why?
I agree 100% with you. It started with, as much as I love him, it started with Vassar Clements and Kenny Baker and Byron Berline. They didn't play the melodies real good. They would play just single note. Well, it actually kind of started with Tommy Jackson when Ray Price had to get him drunk to do this. He said, I want you to play a combination of Rufus Thibodeau. Rufus had just played a Cajun lick behind George Jones on, I forget the name of the tune, but anyway, it was a hit, and even to this day, they're still competing with each other. The difference is Ray Price loves 4/4 shuffles, and George Jones likes 2-beat. And you couldn't, very seldom did George Jones do a 4/4 shuffle. But anyway, back to Rufus Thibodeau, he was a great Cajun fiddle player, the best that ever lived. And the only one left now that really can carry his case is Doug Kershaw. But it was kind of what Tommy Jackson did anyway. Because Tommy played well, Cajun, same lick, and so it was a natural thing for Tommy when Ray said, "I want you to play a combination of Rufus Thibodeau, just single string with a little more finesse than what he does, and also Bob Wills, just real soulful long bow, single note." And so after Crazy Arms and Heartaches by the Number and those early Ray Price hits with that single fiddle, that started that thing. And then Vassar and I can't think who else, but in other words, there was more. It became, for years it was twin fiddle with Ray Price, same thing. As Hank Thompson and that, but Ray had found a sound there. And I remember talking to Cliff, his son, about it one day, because we were talking about Willie Nelson and that harmonica, which I can't stand. But anyway, it works for Willie. That's when Willie, with lots of that harmonica, it was the same thing, the early Ray Price, lots of that single note fiddle. But Tommy did it so well because it's kind of what he'd been doing anyway. Just now, when he played the hoedowns, he would always have the drone, and it was a nicer sound. And so right after some of those first hits, Tommy didn't work the road much, but Shorty Lavender worked the road with him, and so. Ray's on. I have a recording somewhere. Ray's on the Opry in those early days, and I'm going to sing. I'm going to do my latest hit. See, it's one that Roger Miller wrote. Anyway, so Shorty does it. Before that, Shorty's like me. He's playing Del Potter double stops and sounding so good. And even after Crazy Arms was a hit with the one fiddle on the early Ganaway things, Del Potter will still be sitting right there with him, and they play it in the Nashville sound, like say Hartford loved that, and it sounds so much better, 3 parts rather than just one note. And but for years when we worked the road, me and Shorty, Ray would want us to play single note then, and it just was. It's more of a folk. It just opened the door for Mark O'Connor and a lot of people that were good at that. And it's nobody can ever play like anybody else. So like only Tommy will sound right on those things. When me and Shorty would try to imitate him, We're not being our honest self. You got to be yourself. So back to the main point of the interview, everybody needs to do their own thing. If you can find some different sound on your instrument that nobody's thought to do yet, like some of these fast guys, whatever. But if you can, like, well, there's only one Jesse McReynolds, but he found his own thing, a couple different things, and how can you beat that? And again, it's the harmony thing, harmony's wonderful. That's why, one of my favorite hymn writers, Albert Lee Brumling, not Albert Lee, Albert Brumling. Albert Brumley would write all those parts, like No Tears in Heaven and Turn Your Radio On. Let's see, what's some of the other ones? I'll Fly Away. But anyway, the harmonies were very important, and I think they still are. And now when Ray goes out, he uses what was Del Morse Jr. and a lot. Now it's Derek Paul. But it's not hard to play if you know your scales and can play in tune and you study some of those early Tommy Jacksons. It's not hard to necessarily sound like the record, but that's been done. So everybody needs to find their own thing, like what with Ray's help, and to this day Ray calls it his style. He doesn't call it Tommy Jackson style. Calls it his style, but anyway.
How do you know when you're when you're edging up on something good? Like when you felt like when you got the flow going and you feel like it's your unique energy signature. How do you know? How does it make you feel? How do you know, like, I'm on it right now?
Again, when that rhythm's right, you can't hardly wait to jump in and play. You're excited. Everything's feeling real good, and it's an automatic thing with good players. You got one bad player or one even not so good a player, it can be a train wreck. If the singer's bad, if the songs are not good, all that's so important. But luckily, when you're in, you get to record with all these people, and so sometimes the producer if he's a good producer, he'll have a suggestion, and you can tell he give it some thought, and he knows where he wants the different instruments to feel, and then because I'm up all night, if I had a 10 a.m., I'd stay. At one time, I stayed up all night, and I was just a nervous wreck. I thought, well, I got to get all practiced up. And the best thing you can do is have lots of rest. If you're tired, you're liable to end up telling the producer off, and then you lose that account. But if you have lots of rest, everything that you've learned from the time you was a kid, whenever you started playing, your first thoughts are the best ones. And whatever, write it out or whatever, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something notey or clever. When you do that, you're thinking about self, and that's the last person you want to think about. You want to think about what would help this song to become good. What do I need to do? They want fiddle on it, but listen to those words and just be careful to play in tune good, and it may just call for you setting the bow on the string just at the right place. And I feel like I probably shouldn't say this while you're recording it, but I feel like very seldom does anybody listen to the words now when I'm hearing their feels, and they're wanting to play something flashy, and if it's a song that has a melody, what's wrong with playing the melody, playing double stops or whatever? But a lot of extra notes just takes away from the melody. Like a good melody, for example, like Body and Soul, da 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 da. How can you beat that? Or Stardust, do da 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 da. And even if it's not that great of a melody, if it's something that needs some embellishment, grace notes are good, or double stops are good. What I try to do as far as my feels, a lot of times if I am thinking a little bit from my head, it's knowing that the singer, he's going to rest on the third of the chord. And so I'll try to end my feel to match him or come in on top of that with two harmony notes to go with his note, and it makes it sound more like, it's a fuller sound. I take advantage of his voice if they're wanting me to be busy, a little bit and play more. But that's easier said than done if it's a brand new song. Sometimes, if they're doing an old song, Tennessee Waltz or something you're real familiar with, then you automatically know where that feel is going to be and what note they ended on, or what note they're going to come back in on, so that. And I'll confess, that's thinking with your mind instead of your heart, and very seldom does that work out, in all honesty. It's like you'll automatically hear what's the best thing for you to do if you tune into the universe. It's a huge, it's depends sometimes on the key. If it's an uncomfortable key, I recommend retuning or whatever, be comfortable. But years ago, they had so much respect for the fiddle in those early days. They would ask Tommy Jackson, "I want a good Cajun fiddle. Is this key going to be all right?" And Tommy would, in some cases, would say, "No, that doesn't lay good on the fiddle in that key." "Oh, well, I'll switch keys." The singers worked with us. They like backstage at the Ryman, they would say, "Get your fiddle, buddy. Let's play one." They loved to play the guitar behind you. Guys like Copus and Hawkshaw and Hank Snow. They Farron would come over to Tootsie's and jam with us, and buy all kind of instruments. The early singers, they loved the picking, and they wished that they could play. Dottie West was like that. They loved to have jam sessions at their house, and so different. Now these young rock and roll singers, I can replace you, and they don't. I mean, with the exception of Josh Turner, they've all got a bad attitude from what I've noticed. I mean, I'm sure there's some out there that I don't know about that maybe have a good attitude and respect the good musicians that they have. The musicians, to me, are the real heroes. All those intros that Pig Robbins came up with, you name it, all of them. He could come up with an intro that would just be killer. He was the star, and same as Lloyd Green and Buddy Emmons and Jimmy Day. Like I say, guys like Jess McReynolds, they're one of a kind, and it's not easy to find something of your own. How I got by, I always just loved harmony, so I was, whenever they needed a second fiddle, in the early days I'd work with Tommy Jackson or Dale Potter, and then same way with Gimble. I always played the harmony when I was with Chubby, on the early Hank Snow records, and always played the harmony with Farron, with Tommy Jackson on Wind Me Up or whatever. I was the harmony player. 4 in the morning. In fact, on 4 in the morning, Red Hayes and the other fiddle player both just played the melody, and I was the only one playing the harmony. But that's what came natural for me. That was my thing. I was a harmony guy. And Hank Snow, you say, I need to pay you double scale because you double stops. I just always liked double stops and harmonizing with whatever the melody was. But again, there used to be melodies to these tunes, and it was a challenge to find, like I mean, I didn't get to record on the original, but like now and then there's a Fool Such as I, the harmony, because it's, say you're an A, I think that's where he does it. Do, 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 do. It goes to D flat, da, 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 and then a diminished, da, 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 da. And to just work out the harmonies to that was a challenge for me when I was a kid. And but I got real good at it, and so I still do that. But now I'm doing it on a little deeper. You know, I like to work on harder tunes now, but even if you know, it's like when a tree falls in a forest, whether or not anybody knows about it or not, it fell, and so I even, and again, I'm trying to, like, we see all these people going down to you, and you know, I'm a 25-year member, I'm a 50-year member. I've never done that. I try to downplay my ego. I mean, I have to work at it, because naturally a lot of times I want to say, oh yeah, well, I played on whatever, and it never sounds right, and it never means anything. The person listening to that, they just wish that they could say, well, you know, I played on, and so just be quiet, mind your own business, and work with your hands, and do something that you're happy with, or do it. Number one, do it for God. And
so you feel like the pursuit and the way your relationship to it is a spiritual one.
Oh, definitely. I would pray when I would leave the house. I used to live way out in the country back when I was having those long, I mean, I only had about 7 real good years. I worked from the late 60s to the early 80s. But during that time, there was about 7 real good years. But anyway, I was better then, I think, than I am now. Seems when you get older, you can't quit looking at the pretty gals. But like I prayed on the way to town. I'm not saying I prayed the whole way, because I was about an hour out of town. I lived on the other side of Fairview. But anyway, and I would pray on the session when I was stumped. And you probably know how that is. Like when you pray, it's like the answer's right there immediately. And so that's what it's really all about. It's all about God. If you can forget yourself and think of God, or think of other people, if somebody's having a hard time in the studio, go help them. Make sure they got the good chord chart. Maybe it's somebody kind of new or something. And then you play too with whatever the feel is. Like if Pig does the first fills, you listen to what he's doing, and you know better on this next verse what style, a little bit. You know, you don't want to get crazy, but I remember Pete Drake used to say to me, how come you play everything? He thought I played everything with too much of, I guess, a dotted quarter note, that's from all that swing embedded in me. And I said, I don't know why I do that, but you end up playing a certain way if you're true to yourself anyway, and true to the song, and true to him. So it just comes out the way it comes out, and I always liked bluegrass too, but I as much as I loved Earl Scruggs, and I think he was the best all the way around, it actually, the earlier bluegrass with string bean, I lean more towards that. I think it swung more. So, and like I say, Bill was jazzing it up. He didn't realize he was. He called it old-timey. There ain't nothing square about his playing, you know what I mean? When my brother is a Chet Atkins clone and everything's cheek, well, it just doesn't swing, and I can't. We don't play good together. We're the best of brothers, but can't. And Chet would set in with me and Gimbal occasionally on some CMA show or something on the Opry, and it's just a different world. different world. And so in order for the banjo, I guess, to do the rolls just right, they got to work out their fingers and everything. And my favorite one years ago really was Bobby Thompson. And I don't know, he was just very versatile, could play fiddle tunes or whatever. He was just a monster on that banjo. I guess they call it chromatic, but
you mentioned that you thought you were better in some ways years ago. A lot of the people that maybe know you as well as anybody around town, have told me that they think what you're doing now is the best you've ever done. And I don't know if that's harmonically or if it's conceptually. But where do you feel like your creativity's taking you right now? Because I've heard that from from Kurt Story and Billy and Amanda and Chris.
No kidding.
All these people really.
Wow, that's high compliment. I love all those people. Goodness. Well, I shouldn't say this, but I do think that I play better than I ever did. Yeah, that's terrible. I don't know necessarily if I could play in the studio, and there's something about when you get used to working with the regular guys all the time. You from working with them so much, you know exactly. I don't know. The few sessions that I've done off and on, maybe once a year or whatever, I don't feel comfortable like I used to, because it's so much different beat, the heavy drums and all that. But
it's not as much. It's almost like a telepathic thing when you get to play all the time with people that you know where they're going, they know where you're going.
Yeah,
and it can be almost like a psychic. I mean, maybe that's taking it too out there, but it seems like you can just it all lays out, and then you don't have to worry about it. You're comfortable and you can play your best.
Yeah, I'm working on tunes right now. I think I have a dozen tunes that'll hold up. It's basically all instrumentals, and I'm planning on making a CD to go with it. And it's basically, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it Western Swing, and it's for two fiddle players, but both of them are playing double stops. So I might have I'm going to pitch it to Mel Big, and and maybe have two CDs, like one and then one with the separate parts that they can play along with that, and then maybe I need three CDs. One where they can just play with the track, probably use my son on bass and have a rhythm section, but it's all of my whole life of work in a way, even though it's just practically nothing compared to a real great writer like Irving Berlin or Gershwin Brothers. But it's fiddle stuff. It's fiddle music for two violins and or two fiddles and I do better when I work out, like if it's a jazzy type thing. If I work out this solo, in all honesty, and give it some thought, but in such a way that it'll hold up, hopefully. And so I write out the melodies, and then I write what I call a couple of shout courses, which is my idea of I like jazz, but I like the early jazz, like the big band guys, like Count Basie, Duke Ellington, or whoever, Glenn Miller. And they would have maybe one guy stand up and take 8 measures or 16, and then they'd go back and have either the melody or the whole orchestra playing something interesting. And I always like that kind of jazz. And
then we stands up. That's the shout chorus.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, and that was known as a shout chorus, and the whole orchestra played it. And then occasionally it sounds good, just one instrument. great trumpet player or something standing up, or a saxophone player, and he'll play not a real long thing. When he got into the John Coltrane, long solos where it's a whole album of just saxophone and rhythm section, I honestly can't enjoy it. I've tried. Now, Billy can hold up forever just all by himself, and so can guys in the past, like Mark Feldman, a fiddle player that was here back in the 70s. He went to New York, and back in the early 80s, he was known as the up-and-coming best jazz fiddle player in the world. Now, since then, there's some other guys like Christian House, and I can't think of some of them, but and Billy would be one of them. But even though it's great, and I admire them, and I'm fascinated about how in the world they can flow like they do, it's not something I can listen to over and over and over. I can listen to a good piano record, or a good guitar record, or a good trumpet record over and over and over, and even if they stretch out quite a bit, I don't mind that. But on the fiddle, I don't know. Sometimes I wish I'd have took up either trombone or trumpet, because that appeals to me, or a guitar or a piano. But the fiddle, I think, is more for pretty stuff. I guess I hear more violin than I do fiddle, even though I'm not a very good violinist. I just like that pretty sound from the fiddles, and I like because of what inspired me to play was when I heard Del Potter playing Fiddlesticks Boogie on the Opry, and I thought, I didn't know you could play a boogie on the fiddle. And I almost had a car wreck. I just got my license. I was about 16, and I heard that, and man, I just became a fan. And so when I moved into Mom's when I was 19, I still was just crazy about Del, and I think, well, what would Del do on this? So when I did the occasional odd session back there in the late 50s, I was thinking wrong, because I was trying to copy him, and it's before I really learned to listen to the words, and so that's kind of my life story.
I got one more question.
All
It's
right.
been so nice for you to, to take the time. Where do you think? What would you like to see happen in Nashville creatively with music? What do you think's missing, or where's it need to go? Like,
It ain't gonna happen, but I'd love it. I'd love it if. Remember when BR 549? I thought that was a ray of hope. But then remember when the Whites first were here, and again, it doesn't happen and it made me realize good music doesn't sell. When Willie was singing real good with orchestras and everything, one of the best, his early stuff was just great. It didn't sell. So when he did something simple like Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, and then later with adding that harmonica, Willie became a huge star. And he had, in other words, purposely, he didn't used to sing with any vibrato, so he started singing with vibrato, and if it wasn't for the Mafia, probably Frank Sinatra wouldn't have sold. Real good music just never did sell that much. Like again, those early great jazz records that I liked, and the actual performers, a lot of times they were driving taxi cab up in New York City. I'd go and see them in the late 50s, and that bass just wearing it out and everything. But it seems like that jazz doesn't sell, and I can understand that to a certain extent, but it seems like even in country music, it doesn't sell unless it's a little bit bad. Well, for one thing, there isn't any more great singers like Eddie Arnold or Marty Robbins or Jim Reeves or Patsy Cline. They're okay singers, I guess, but seems like the reason why, maybe it's just me, but I think the reason why people like rock and roll is the teenage girls buy the records, and they like that beat. And it just seems like because of everybody, the record companies all knowing this too, and them hiring young kids to run the record labels that are into that, that sells, and it just seems like these great times, like with Grandpa Jones or Cowboy Copas or Hawkshaw, it didn't sell. Ernest Tubb, I think somebody said the biggest record sales for him was 300,000 or something. They didn't sell good music, but people liked to hear them because it was country people listening. They couldn't afford to buy records. They were milking their cows, and they were curious what they looked like. They might could afford a ticket to go see them, maybe the Louvin brothers or something, when they came to their hometown, but they couldn't afford to buy their records. And so now that they've got it all figured out, they take Taylor Swift or whoever, and they buy them all the way, and they look good. So it's about looks, it's about the beat. Occasionally there might be a good song, but let's face it, I'm kind of asking you, I don't remember anything really good to speak of since the Beatles. The Beatles came back and were creative. Of course, Elvis, was more or less a gimmick thing, first white guy to imitate the black. And but with the Beatles, can you think of anything else after that in a real big way?
No.
So that's why I say I don't think it's coming back. It's like, how are you going to improve on Orange Blossom Special? How are you going to improve on Austin Healey cars or Harley Davidson motorcycles? I don't know, the Chinese or somebody might come up. It'll probably, but luckily for us, the Chinese and the Japanese never have been real creative. So. But they own us now. I don't really see it ever coming back because BR549, they should have been huge, right? Chuck Mead's still trying to do it, and I hope he can. But for one thing, you got to really be good, you got to have a voice. I'm trying to think of somebody that really has a good voice. Most of these people, like down on Broadway and stuff, you don't really, they're all imitating Marty Robbins or whoever. They don't, there's not any new sounds or new guys. There were Greg Garin kind of imitated Hank, and he did good. Again, well, he's got other problems anyway, but I just don't see it ever. I think it peaked out really in the 50s. Now, that's just my 2 cents. I hope I'm wrong. But everybody's wanting to get into rock and roll. A lot of my friends even, but not Chris Scruggs. Well, he's true blue, pretty much. I mean, sometimes he'll have to do a little rock set to please the people that are coming to see him or going for a record deal or something, but he sincerely loves the old country. But it just doesn't seem to work. They don't like good music. Here and there, a little bit in the 80s, maybe, but I think it all went to where in the 80s. So it seems like it had been back by now if it was going to come back. And different world now. There's no more farmers. I mean, to speak of, at least. I mean, if there is, they're big farmers with all the big machinery, and they own everything. But
Right.
But as far as the simple folks, like everybody wasn't that far away from the Mennonites when I was a kid growing up. We were all farmers, and other than them, and again, they're not going to go out and buy records,
Mm-hmm.
So it's over basically. I'm thankful that I got in on the last few years there in the late 50s. That's because it was starting to. Elvis had already came about, and it was starting. But it came. I mean, the Beatles came up with some melodies and some words, but they were kind of different. But other than them, I mean, I'm not into some of those other. Everybody thinks I'm crazy, but not everybody. But some of the guys that have been lucky that are still doing it that I've worked a little bit with, like. Say Paul Franklin. But they made their money and became famous from being with great rock people, basically. And so naturally, they think, whatever. I mean, Stevie Wonder, I like some of the pop artists. Like Stevie Wonder, I think was great. Who else like that? You know, the pop, you know, Rosemary Clooney was, all those great singers up until they died, they were fan. I don't know how well they done. When I was with Judy Lynn in the early '60s, I went out and worked in Las Vegas for a couple of years, and I would go and see those great groups like that. And I don't know. It's and I understand what Owen and Chet was trying to do, bringing in the string sections and everything. But they all got to think about money, and they didn't mean to, but they basically killed people like country people like Kitty Wells and Tommy Jackson and early, you know, and some of them weren't all that good. Stonewall Jackson was almost a little too country for me even, but I missed that idea. To me, Hank Williams was the ultimate because he liked fiddle and steel, and that's when the whole role for the guitar player, just like the early Ray Price, it was just the guitar player just played tic-tac, and it was heaven just to be sharing the fields with just one other guy, great steel player. He played fiddle, and so I can't imagine it ever being like that again. It's no more Bob Wills, no more Bill Monroe. So you got all these imitators, and they all, you know, Ricky Skaggs, great, but to me, when it's all said and done, if you could write one song like Boudleaux Bryant wrote Rocky Top, and he wrote Bye Bye Love for the Everly Brothers, and all those hundreds of hits. And again, now the Everly Brothers was great because they were young, and they were basically doing what Ira and Charlie Lubin did, but in a more rock and roll way. So they meant well, but they just opened up the world for more rock. Even though they're old now, but brothers just can't seem to get along. Yeah, I feel like I was very lucky to get a few days, you know, and even with doing the Loretta Lynn show, working with the Wilburn brothers, that was, you know, you won't see any more TV shows like that. You know what I'm saying? It's, of course, Marty Robbins kind of does an imitation. I mean, not Marty Robbins, Marty Stewart does an imitation of that. But again, it's everybody's trying to copy what they loved, and that's not the real thing. It's like you got to be your own, a new guy. How are you going to come up with something new? It's all been done. Hate to say it, but I think, just my 2 cents, I think it's winding up. You know, I think he's coming back here anytime to put an end to all this. It's just too crazy. It's become like too crazy.
Certainly plenty of signs that might.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, goodness, trying to make friends with the world, you can't make friends with people that are bombing us and trying to kill us. Look how much trouble it is now to even fly on the airplane or whatever.
It's true.